Hey everyone, welcome to another video, and today I'm going to be hiking the Mugu Peak Trail in Malibu, California. Mugu Peak Trail is a 2.7-mile loop located in Malibu, California that features panoramic ocean views and is rated as difficult. This trail features about 1,200 feet of elevation gain and is located near the Santa Monica Mountain Range Recreation Area. Even though this hike is rated as strenuous, some parts of it were only moderately difficult, but be aware that the hike may take you upwards of 2 hours to complete. There is no information or any signs whatsoever at the beginning of the trail except for this small sign that says strenuous hike, so be aware that you need to know all the information on the hike before arriving. Also be aware that there are no maps available anywhere at this trail, including at the entrance, so either bring your own map or look at one before you leave so you know where you're going while you're hiking on the trail. So the entrance and after the entrance is mainly an uphill, and it continues to go uphill up to this mountain. The trail became quiet and peaceful as we began to gain elevation, but at the beginning it was extremely loud, especially since there was military target practice in the background on the day I was there. As I have said, the entire hike is rated as difficult or strenuous, but the main strenuous part is a major elevation gain after walking for about 20 minutes along the beginning of the trail. The beginning of the trail itself is fairly easy, with only a gradual elevation gain, as with the rest of the trail until you reach the peak. As the trail continues to go uphill, it stays pretty wide, so this part shouldn't be too hard to hike. If you're coming here only for the hike, or if you're coming here to exercise in a way such as running along the trail, I'd recommend coming on either a cloudy or foggy day because it will be much easier because of the cooler temperatures. But if you are planning to come to this trail to see the view at the peak of the trail, I'd recommend coming on a sunny or clear day because you'll have a much better panoramic ocean view. For this part of the trail, even if you don't come on a clear day, as you begin to sharply gain elevation around this point, you will start to see a wider panoramic ocean view as well as mountain views to both sides. Even though this trail was expected to be heavily trafficked, the beginning portions as well as the peak were the most crowded on the day that I went. This is the view after walking for about 15 minutes up the trail. Alright, so here after walking for about 15-20 minutes, you get a really nice panoramic view of the ocean and everything below. I am here on a foggy day, so you can see the fog starting to move along the tops of the mountains. And if you do come here on a foggy day, you can stop here because that makes a nice photo opportunity. This is after walking for about 10 minutes from the last point. You get a very nice panoramic ocean view. And this is only partway into the hike, so I don't know what the view at the top will look like. So as you do start to come up the trail, there are some small areas where you can pull off from the main trail and take a short break and see the view. So as you start gaining elevation, you can start to really see the fog moving around the tops of these mountains here. And that makes a very nice photo opportunity, and it's cool to see as you start gaining higher elevation. If you come here on a clear day, there will be nice panoramic views at almost every point along the trail, but since I did come here on a foggy day, the fog began to roll in even thicker as I was coming up the trail, which began to obscure the ocean views. So as you can see, after walking on the trail for about, I think, 35 minutes or so, you reach this point where the trail is gradually going uphill and is mostly flat before getting a lot more elevation in the next section. And from here you can just see the fog passing around the mountains if you come on a foggy day like I did. And for the view, you mostly just see the ocean straight ahead, which just appears to be water from here. There's no beach or anything in sight. And aside from the view, for the vegetation on this trail, you're not going to see much except a few small patches of green shrubs, but it's mostly dry grass and brush here. So just after passing the section where I recorded the last clip, the trail starts to gain a lot of elevation, and there's a straight uphill for probably 10 or 15 minutes of walking. And the view begins to get even wider as you gain elevation. So as you're gaining elevation along this part of the trail, there are some rocky areas and some rocks that you need to step over, but the trail is wide, so that shouldn't be a problem. So at this point, after you've finished coming up the beginning of the main trail, you can choose to go either way along the trails at the top of this part, because it just connects as a loop, and this entire trail is 2.3 miles long, or about 2.3 miles long. Around this point, you don't get much of a view if you're here on a foggy day, but you can get some nice photos, or you can stop and see the fog slowly coming over the tops of the mountains. So I've been taking a break here for a few minutes now. You can see the fog really starting to come in thickly here. You can almost not see any point of the view at all. You can't even see the mountains right to the sides of this trail. It's just thick fog coming in from the ocean here. So there are a few areas along the side of the trail, even though it's still wide, where the ground has collapsed slightly, so just avoid those areas. If you look at the vegetation surrounding these parts of the trail, you can see a small amount of fire damage remaining from fires that passed through this area in the last few years. I don't know what specific fires this would have been, but you can see a few charred shrubs and other plants along here. So this part of the hike has a narrower trail than the beginning, but so far this part is only moderately difficult. I'd say the most difficult part so far was the elevation climb at the beginning. And here the trail is gradually gaining some elevation, but is fairly flat along this point. And you would get a nice view of the ocean if you were here on a clear day, but for now you can get a nice view of faintly the ocean, but you can see the fog moving in and the mountains below. Okay, so right around here is another nice viewpoint of the ocean and the mountains and all the land below. So there are a few side trails along this along this main section that are closed. So we didn't go on those because I'm not exactly sure if they're closed for any reasons, or they could be unsafe. But as you're along the main trail, you do get a nice ocean view here. This part of the trail, which is about halfway through the entire hike if you're ending at the peak, was probably the easiest and was only moderately difficult because it was mainly flat and only slightly gaining elevation. Even though the view was mostly the same around this point as it was in earlier portions of the trail, the vegetation did begin to shift to more cactuses and green shrubs, as opposed to only the dry brush and fire-damaged shrubs before. So after we've been walking for, I'd say, about 1 hour, or a little bit more, or a little bit less, the trail is still gradually gaining elevation as we're going higher into the mountains and eventually reaching the peak where you're supposed to get a very nice panoramic ocean view. So the trail continues upward toward the peak, as you can see along the side of that mountain. And the peak appears to be somewhere up there behind that bank of fog. So far, this part of the trail is fairly easy or moderately easy, but it's definitely not as difficult as the beginning parts because you're only gradually gaining elevation. Here, after nearly completing the first part of the hike, you can begin to see the trail that leads to the peak, which is straight ahead on the mountain where I'm pointing in the clip. So if the day was clearer, but obviously you can't have much of a view since there's fog, the ocean view would be that way. And if you turn around here, you have a mountain view, but that's also mostly obscured by fog. Even though you can only faintly see it from this point, there is a flagpole on the peak that is mostly obscured behind the fog. After reaching the peak, unfortunately there wasn't much view because of the clouds and fog at the time I was there, but it was still a nice place to take a break before descending down the mountain to finish the hike. If you're planning to also hike the main loop of this trail on the same day that you're hiking to the peak is also a great place where you can rest and take some water or even eat lunch before continuing your hike. If you do come here on a foggy day, even though it does make for a nice hike because you won't have to deal with any heat or sun, once you get to the peak, you won't be able to see very much of a view at all because it's mostly just surrounded by clouds and fog. So as you're starting to descend from the peak and coming back down the trail, It is a fairly steep downhill, especially as you're coming straight down from the peak. But the trail is wide and there are no drops on either side, so it should be fairly easy as long as you have the patience to go downhill slowly. There is a little bit less fog than when we were coming up to the peak, so I decided to take this way down instead of going back around the loop on the inside of the mountain, so you at least get some of the ocean view and not just more mountain view, because we've already seen a lot of that today. So after walking down from the peak for about 15 minutes, we're not close to finishing yet, but at this point you can see an ocean view and you can see the beaches, and as well as that sand hill along the side of the mountain there, which is popular for people to run on for exercise and other things. When you're planning to do this hike, also be aware that the way down the trail will take far less time than coming up the trail. My example is that it took me 2 hours to come up the trail and about 40 minutes to come down the trail, but this is also influenced by the fact that I was filming videos on the first time and I wasn't on the way back, and I was mostly recording time lapses on the way back, so it took far less time. So after walking for another 5 to 10 minutes, you can see another partly clear ocean view here, but it still is fairly foggy, even though a lot of fog has cleared since we got here. So as the fog has been gradually clearing, you can slowly get a wider and clearer ocean view from partway down the trail. Even though portions of the fog had cleared, most of the views were still partly or totally obscured by the fog because it had not totally cleared yet. Okay, so on the way down the trail as you're coming back to the entrance, it is a very steep descent, and it was steep on the way up, but it is more difficult as you're coming down because it can be slippery and there can be some rocks in the trail. Alright, so we are going downhill and we are almost back to the entrance. The last part of the downhill on this trail is also pretty steep, just as the beginning was. And if you hear a lot of background noise, apparently there's some army or some other kind of target practice happening at that military base over there. So that will be the end of this video and hike for now. Thanks for watching, and I'll be back soon for another video.